Snow is falling again over a small American town. Christmas lights glow on porches, wreaths hang on doors, and carols play softly in the distance. From the outside, it looks like every postcard perfect December. But you and I both know that some hearts don't shine just because the lights do. Some hearts remember the night everything fell apart. Maybe you know this feeling. You had a life planned, a home, a future, a love you thought would stay. And then without warning, he walked away, leaving not just an empty chair at the table, but bills, broken promises, and a silence that hurt louder than any fight. That's what happened to Anna. Years ago, right before Christmas, Anna watched the man she loved, Cole, choose himself over them. He left their small town chasing success, freedom, and a life that didn't include her. The decorations were still up, the tree still lit, but her world was in ruins. While everyone else celebrated hope, she learned how to survive heartbreak with no audience, no applause, and no one to hold her while she cried. Maybe like Anna, you also had to pick up pieces no one else saw. You learned how to work twice as hard, how to smile in front of people and collapse in private, how to live a normal life with a heart that still flinched every time December came back around. You stopped waiting at the window. You stopped believing that the person who broke you would ever knock on your door again. The town moved on. Christmases came and went. Trees went up, lights came down, years passed. Anna rebuilt her life in quiet ways. One shift at a time, one small decision at a time, one deep breath at a time. She didn't need Cole anymore. At least that's o que ela dizia para si mesma todas as noites em que a neve caía e a casa parecia grande demais. But God has a way of visiting stories we think are over, not to erase the past, but to redeem what we thought was beyond repair. And this year, when the first snow touched the roofs and the town prepared another Christmas festival, something, or rather, someone, came back Anna never expected to see again. Cole. He didn't return with the glow of success or the arrogance of quem venceu na vida. He didn't come back to show how bem ele estava sem ela. He came back with nothing. No company, no image, no carefully built life to hide behind. Just empty hands, tired eyes, and a heart finally ready to admit what he had done. The man who once walked away, leaving her life in ruins, returned to that same small town. On his knees before God, because he finally understood that what he had destroyed in Anna he could never rebuild sozinho. On his knees before his own past, because there's no redemption without facing what you were. And one day maybe, on his knees before the woman whose heart he had shattered. Tonight, you're not just going to watch a Christmas story. You're going to walk through the snow-covered streets of this town. You're going to step into Anna's kitchen, feel the weight of her memories, and hear the words she never got to say the night he left. You're going to see Cole not as a perfect hero returning, but as a broken man learning how to change, step by step, choice by choice. This is not a story about a woman who simply takes him back because it's Christmas. This is a story about boundaries, dignity, truth, and a love that only makes sense depois de restauração. It's about a man who finally understands that apologies without transformation are just words, and about a woman who discovers that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened, but allowing God to write a different ending. If you've ever been abandoned, betrayed, or left to rebuild alone, if you've ever looked at Christmas lights and thought, "It's beautiful out there, but inside me it's still broken," then this story is for you. You're not watching by accident. There's something in Anna's journey that your heart needs to hear. Stay with me until the end, because in this episode of Redeemed Hearts, Christmas Redemption, you'll see what happens when the man who ruined everything comes back not demanding another chance, but ready to face every consequence. You'll see what real change looks like, what forgiveness really costs, and how Christmas doesn't magically fix the past, but it can redeem a heart that finally chooses truth. This is the story of Anna and Cole. He left her life in ruins, and many Christmases later, Christmas brought him back on his knees. Let's begin. The morning had started with the kind of quiet that usually meant peace. Snow rested gently on rooftops, the sky a soft gray blanket over the town. In the kitchen, the coffee machine hummed while cinnamon rolls baked in the oven. Anna moved between the counter and the stove, humming along to a Christmas song on the radio. She checked the time on the old clock above the sink and smiled, imagining Cole walking through the door. He was supposed to come home early that day, to make up for the last few weeks, he had said. Back then, she still believed him. The house carried the smell of vanilla and pine needles. The Christmas tree in the living room was half decorated, lights dangling like unfinished thoughts. Boxes of ornaments lay open on the floor, memories wrapped in old newspaper. Anna picked up a wooden snowflake, one they had bought in their first year of marriage. She traced its edges and remembered when Cole had insisted they start their own traditions. "We're a team, you and me against the world," he had whispered back then. Those words felt like they belonged to another lifetime. Outside, Main Street was already glowing with festive banners and garlands. Children ran past their front window, their boots leaving messy trails in the snow. Somewhere in the distance, the church bells chimed, counting down the days until Christmas Eve. For everyone else, it was just another holiday season. For Anna, it felt like one last chance to fix what she could not name. The air between her and Cole had been colder than the December breeze lately. She kept telling herself it was just stress. It had started slowly in ways that were easy to explain away. Late nights at work, urgent deals, and a phone that seemed to live in his hand. He stopped looking her in the eyes when he came home, hugging her with one arm instead of two. Dinners became quiet, filled with the clink of silverware and the glow of his screen. When she asked if everything was okay, he would kiss her forehead and say, "I'm just tired." She wanted to believe him so badly that she ignored the ache in her chest. Love, she thought, deserved the benefit of the doubt. But doubt grows roots when silence feeds it. There were messages he wouldn't explain, numbers he wouldn't name, nights when his cologne still lingered. But he smelled of places that were not home. He had begun to speak of the town as if it were a cage, not a community. "People here think too small, Anna," he said once, staring out the window instead of at her. "You're too good to be stuck here," she had answered, trying to turn it into a compliment. What she didn't know was that he was already planning a life that didn't include her. On that particular day, just a few days before Christmas, she woke up with determination. She would make the house warm, the food perfect, the atmosphere soft enough to hold their tension. She wore the sweater he once said made her look like home. Soft cream, sleeves too long. On the table, she set 2 mugs, each with a candy cane resting on the rim. A tiny garland of lights framed the window, casting a golden halo over the kitchen. If love could be rebuilt with effort, she would give everything she had. She still believed that sometimes people just needed a reason to stay. While she prepared the evening, Cole sat alone in his car in a parking lot across town. The engine was off, but the cold crept in through the windows anyway. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. On the passenger seat, a small black suitcase sat zipped and ready. He had rehearsed the words so many times they no longer sounded like sentences. Just fragments of justification, excuses polished until they almost sounded noble. "I need more. I can't stay here. This isn't the life I want." He had told himself it was bravery, choosing to leave before resentment consumed him. But deep down, he knew it was fear. Fear of ordinary days, of quiet, of being truly known. Ambition had become a doorway he wanted to walk through alone. He thought leaving would make him feel powerful, in control, free. Instead, sitting there in the half-frozen car, his heart felt strangely heavy. He checked the time and sighed, knowing Anna would be waiting. He started the engine anyway. The sound of his truck pulling into the driveway made Anna's heart skip. She wiped her hands on a towel, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her sweater. She practiced a smile in the reflection of the microwave, trying not to look desperate. The front door opened, and cold air rushed in before Cole did. He stepped into the house with a distance that had nothing to do with temperature. His eyes scanned the room, the tree, the table, the lights, like he was seeing a museum exhibit. He didn't say, "It looks beautiful." He just said, "We need to talk." Those 4 words sliced through the room more sharply than any argument. Anna's fingers tightened around the back of a chair as she turned to face him. "Okay," she answered, forcing her voice not to tremble. "Can it wait until after dinner?" she tried, pointing to the food she had prepared. Cole shook his head slowly, jaw clenched, gaze avoiding hers. No, it can't. The cinnamon and pine scent suddenly made her feel sick. They moved to the living room, sitting opposite each other, the half-decorated tree between them. The lights flickered softly, reflecting on the small gap growing into a chasm. Cole leaned forward, elbows on his knees, as if the words were too heavy to carry upright. "I don't know how to say this without sounding like a villain," he started. Anna's heart pounded in her ears, drowning out the distant sound of carols outside. "Just say it," she whispered, even though every part of her wanted him to stop. He exhaled, a long, tired breath. "I don't want this life anymore." The sentence fell between them like shattered glass. Anna blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. What does that mean?" she asked, her voice thin. "This town, this routine, this marriage," he said, finally looking at her. The word marriage tasted bitter coming from his mouth. "It's like I woke up and realized I've been living someone else's dream." He didn't realize that for her, he had been the dream. "Someone else's dream?" she repeated, trying to keep her breathing steady. "Whose dream, Cole? The man who promised me we were in this together?" He flinched, but pride hardened his features. "I was young. I didn't know what I wanted. I just did what everyone expected. So now I'm... What, a mistake?" Anna asked, a tear finally escaping. He looked away, eyes fixed on a crack in the wooden floor. "I just know I can't stay. I'll suffocate if I do." The room spun as his words landed one after the other. "I'm not asking you to stay in a prison, Cole. We can work through this," she pleaded. "We can get help, talk, change things, anything, just don't throw everything away." He shook his head again, slower this time, like the decision had already lived in him for months. "I've already accepted a job offer in the city," he admitted. "I leave tonight." Some part of her broke in a way she knew would never grow back the same. "That's why you've been distant. That's why you stopped trying," she said, realization hitting. "You weren't confused. You were leaving in installments." Her words hit him harder than he expected, but he didn't take them back. "I need more than this town, Anna. More than this small life," he answered, not noticing how cruel it sounded. She stood up, every muscle in her body trembling, hands balled into fists at her sides. "This small life is the one we built together. With my love. With my sacrifices." He didn't have an answer that didn't make him look worse. He went to their bedroom and pulled the suitcase from the closet. Anna watched from the doorway, her body frozen while her heart screamed. Every shirt he folded felt like a goodbye she hadn't agreed to. He didn't take the photo frames, the little notes she had written, the mug she'd given him. He only took what he needed to move on. The rest, memories, promises, pieces of her, stayed behind like abandoned furniture. "Please don't do this," she whispered, barely audible. Outside, neighbors were lighting up their houses, unaware that a home was going dark. The glow from the street slipped through the curtains as he wheeled the suitcase to the front door. She followed him, each step heavier than the last. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, not quite brave enough to look back at her fully. "I'll send the papers after the holidays," he said, as if discussing a delivery. Anna stared at him, tears finally streaming freely. "Happy Christmas, I guess," she replied, the words cracked and hollow. The door closed with a sound she would replay in her mind for years. Through the window, she watched his figure grow smaller as he walked toward the truck. The suitcase wheels cut faint lines in the snow, tracks that the wind would soon erase. Inside, the silence roared. One chair empty, one mug untouched, one heart in ruins. Anna walked back to the half-decorated tree and sank to the floor, hugging herself. Somewhere between sobs, she made a quiet promise. Next time she stood up, it would be on her own feet. The city greeted Cole with noise instead of silence, with neon instead of Christmas lights on porches. Tall buildings rose like promises, glittering windows reflecting a life he told himself he deserved. He stepped onto crowded sidewalks and felt anonymous for the first time in years. No small-town faces watching, no neighbors who knew his story. Here he was just another man in a suit with a suitcase and a restless heart. The hotel lobby smelled of polished marble and expensive perfume, a far cry from cinnamon and pine. As he checked in, He felt a strange rush of relief, as if he had escaped something. He didn't let himself think too long about what, or who, he had left behind. His new office was on the 22nd floor, with glass walls and a view of the city that made everything look small. He liked that feeling at first, the way people and cars turned into tiny moving dots beneath him. It made decisions feel cleaner, less personal, as if consequences didn't have faces attached. His boss praised his ambition, his willingness to work late, his hunger for more. In meeting rooms, he learned to speak in numbers and projections instead of feelings and fears. He became the man who said yes to every opportunity, every risky idea, every late-night deal. On paper, he looked like someone winning. The first Christmas away from the small town arrived faster than he expected. Decorations went up around the city, giant trees in corporate lobbies, icy blue lights draped across avenues. Office parties were loud, full of laughter and champagne, and people he barely knew calling him rock star. He smiled for photos, clinked glasses, and let the noise drown out the quiet parts of his mind. Someone handed him a drink and joked, "To never going back to small-town life." He laughed along, raising his glass high, but for a brief second, his chest tightened, and he saw a half-decorated tree in a living room he no longer called home. He told himself Anna would move on quickly. She was strong, capable, too kind to stay stuck on a man like him, he thought. It was easier to imagine her angry than devastated, easier to see her as someone who would be better off without him. That story made him feel less like a villain and more like a misunderstood dreamer. Whenever guilt tried to surface, he smothered it with another project, another client, another late night. If exhaustion could absolve him, he was determined to work himself clean. He didn't understand yet that some debts can't be paid with success. The city had its own rhythm. Early morning coffees, crowded trains, long days under fluorescent lights. Cole adapted quickly, wearing his new life like a tailored suit that fit almost perfectly. He learned which bars closed late, which restaurants impressed clients, which streets felt safest after midnight. He went home to an apartment with sleek furniture and cold floors, no family photos on the walls. The silence there was different from the one in Anna's house. This silence was numbing, not heartbreaking. It didn't echo with memories, only with emptiness. He told himself that meant he'd made the right choice. Women came into his life and left it like seasons he barely noticed. A coworker who liked the same music. A neighbor who brought wine and stayed too long. A woman from a networking event who loved talking about places they'd never been but planned to visit. They laughed, shared dinners, and took photos in dimly lit restaurants, faces close and temporary. Cole kept everything on the surface, charming, attentive, but never truly open. He gave them the version of himself that didn't have a past. Sometimes, when he caught his reflection in a window late at night, he didn't fully recognize it. The man staring back at him wore confidence like armor, jaw set, eyes sharper than before. But there was a flicker underneath, a tiredness that no amount of achievement could mask. He'd brush it off, button his coat, and keep walking, feet hitting the pavement with practiced purpose. He thought about calling Anna once, his finger hovering over her name still saved in his phone. But pride is louder than regret in the beginning. He locked the screen and told himself, "It's better this way." Years passed in promotions and pay raises, in business trips and contracts signed at midnight. He became the man colleagues pointed to as proof that ambition paid off. A small-town guy who made it big, they said, and he smiled like that was all he'd ever wanted. He bought a better car, upgraded his apartment, started drinking coffee that cost more than their old weekly groceries. He called his parents less, sent gifts more. He never asked how the town was doing at Christmas. He never asked how Anna was doing at all. But the heart has a way of keeping records the mind tries to shred. Certain Decembers hit harder than others, especially the ones when he found himself alone on Christmas Eve. One year, a snowstorm rolled through the city, thick flakes swirling outside his high-rise window. The power flickered briefly, and the apartment went dim, candles the only light. He wrapped a blanket around his shoulders and suddenly remembered another storm, one where Anna had curled into him on the couch. They had shared hot chocolate from mismatched mugs, her toes tucked under his leg for warmth. He remembered then the sound of her laughter, and it hurt in a way success never healed. He tried to drown those memories in noise, He turned on the TV, scrolled through his phone, answered emails that could have waited until January. Work had become his favorite sedative, dulling the ache without ever curing it. But that night, every notification felt hollow, every screen a mirror reflecting what he had run from. He imagined Anna decorating a tree without him, maybe with someone else by her side. The thought burned, not because he felt possessive, but because he knew he had forfeited the right to be there. He had chosen himself, and now he had to live with the echo of that choice. There were moments when his mask slipped at work. A junior colleague once mentioned she was engaged to her high school sweetheart from a small town. The room laughed when someone joked, "Better get out while you still can." Cole joined the laughter, but it caught in his throat. Later, in the quiet of his office, he stared at the city lights and wondered when he had become the man he used to swear he'd never be. He remembered the younger version of himself who had called Anna home. Somewhere along the way, he had traded that home for a skyline and a corner office. The first real crack came not in his career, but in his sleep. Nightmares started visiting him in fragments, hallways he couldn't get out of, doors that closed just before he reached them. Sometimes he saw Anna standing in the snow calling his name, but when he moved closer, her face blurred and disappeared. He'd wake up sweating, heart pounding, sheets twisted around his legs. The city outside would still be there, calm and indifferent, lights blinking in distant windows. He'd pour himself a drink and tell himself it was just stress. Stress, after all, was easier to admit than guilt. He avoided going back to the town for as long as he could. When his parents invited him for Christmas, he sent flowers and excuses. "Too much work," he'd say, or "The timing is bad with this new project." In truth, it wasn't work that kept him away. It was the possibility of turning a corner and seeing Anna's face. The idea of meeting her eyes and reading the damage there terrified him more than any boardroom confrontation. It's easier to outrun the past when you never cross its streets. On his birthday one year, his mother called and insisted he video chat. She wanted to see his face, she said, and he reluctantly agreed. The screen lit up with her familiar smile and his father's shy wave from behind her shoulder. They talked about trivial things: weather, health, how fast the grandkids of neighbors were growing. At some point, his mother's voice softened. "They still ask about you at church, you know." "Anna's name comes up sometimes," she said gently. He swallowed hard and changed the subject. After that call, he found himself searching Anna's name online late at night. He scrolled through old social media posts she had stopped updating years ago. There were photos of sunsets over the fields, of pies cooling on windowsills, of handwritten quotes taped to her fridge. He found no wedding pictures, no obvious signs of another relationship. Instead of relief, he felt something like shame wrap around his ribs. He had been the one to leave, but somehow it still hurt to know she might have spent years alone because of his choice. He closed the laptop and whispered into the dark, "You deserve better than me." His facade began to crack at work too, in subtler ways. He grew impatient, sharper in meetings, irritated by minor mistakes. The more success he achieved, the less satisfaction it brought. Promotions felt like moving up floors in a burning building. He smiled for photos, but his eyes looked increasingly tired, shadows deepening beneath them. One colleague asked him over drinks, "What's your endgame, Cole? What are you chasing?" He didn't have an answer that didn't sound empty. Then came the whispers of instability at the company, rumors of legal trouble, of deals rushed through without proper care. Cole found himself at the center of decisions that blurred the line between bold and reckless. He knew better, but pride and fear kept him silent, agreeing to things that made his stomach twist. He told himself it was just how things were done at that level. He didn't realize that the same pattern that had made him leave Anna, avoiding discomfort, chasing more, was now guiding his professional choices. He had built a life on unstable ground and called it progress. The storm brewing over his career was becoming impossible to ignore. On a cold December night, years after he had walked out of Anna's front door, he sat alone in his office long after everyone left. The city was wrapped in winter again, lights blinking against a dark sky that felt heavier than usual. He stared at a stack of documents on his desk, each one carrying the weight of choices made for ambition, not integrity. Outside the glass wall, Snowflakes drifted past like tiny ghosts of all the versions of himself he had abandoned. He thought for the first time with painful clarity, I chose myself, and I still lost something I can't replace. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and felt the first honest crack of regret split through his chest. Somewhere far away, in a small town he'd tried to forget, Christmas lights were turning on without him. The first morning after Cole left, the house didn't feel like a home. It felt like a crime scene. The half-decorated tree stood in the corner like a witness, lights off, branches heavy with unfinished plans. The mug he hadn't touched still sat on the table, a ring of coffee dried at the bottom. Anna moved through the kitchen on autopilot, picking up a plate here, wiping a counter there. Her body remembered the routine, but her mind lagged behind, like it had been left outside in the snow. She tried to make coffee but forgot to add the grounds, staring at the clear hot water in confusion. Grief had a way of making even the simplest tasks feel like advanced equations. People like to say that time heals, but those first weeks, time didn't heal anything. It just watched. It watched her stare at the empty side of the bed every night. It watched her fold laundry that no longer included his shirts. It watched her avoid certain streets in town so she wouldn't pass the diner where they used to sit in the corner booth. The world outside continued with its small-town rhythm. Grocery runs, school drop-offs, Sunday services. Inside her, everything was disorganized, like drawers dumped out onto the floor. There was no manual for how to breathe when the future you planned had been ripped out of your hands. The town began to notice, of course. Small towns always notice. Whispers followed her down aisles at the market, disguised as concern but drenched in curiosity. Poor Anna, some said, as if pity were a blanket that could keep her warm. Others clicked their tongues and muttered about ambition, about men who thought they were too big for their beginnings. A few women hugged her a little tighter at church, saying, God will turn this around somehow. And she nodded even when she didn't feel it. Grief taught her how to smile without letting people see the fracture lines. There were days when she didn't leave the house at all. She'd sit on the living room floor, back against the couch, staring at the silent TV. Sometimes she held the remote in her hand for hours, not pressing a single button. The tree remained half-decorated until January, needles drying and dropping one by one onto the rug. She knew she should take it down, but doing so felt like admitting the holidays had happened without him, and without the life they were supposed to share. So she left it up too long, like a question she wasn't ready to answer. Healing, she was learning, didn't follow the calendar. But bills did. Rent, utilities, groceries. The world didn't pause just because her marriage had fallen apart. One afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table with a stack of envelopes and a calculator, her chest tightening with every number. Cole had taken his paycheck with him, and with it the illusion of financial security. Anna had always contributed, but now every dollar had to stretch into two. She circled numbers, made notes in the margins, and realized something painfully simple. She didn't have the luxury of staying broken. Survival forced her to move while her heart still wanted to crawl. She went back to work the Monday after New Year's. The small cafe on Main Street had always been a second home, a place filled with the hiss of espresso machines and the murmur of conversation. This time, walking through the door felt different, like she was stepping onto a stage. Co-workers exchanged looks, some sympathetic, some awkward, some pretending nothing had changed. Her boss, Mrs. Harding, pulled her into a quick hug that lingered just long enough to say what words couldn't. "We're glad you're here," she said softly. Anna nodded, tied on her apron, and learned how to smile for customers while her heart felt like shattered glass. Work became both a refuge and a test. There was comfort in tasks that had clear steps. Take the order, make the coffee, wipe the counter. No one asked her to process abandonment while steaming milk. But there were also landmines everywhere. Songs playing over the speakers that reminded her of winter nights with Cole, couples holding hands in line, laughter bubbling from shared booths. Sometimes she caught herself glancing at the door when the bell rang, as if some stubborn part of her still expected him to walk in. He never did. And slowly, the bell became just a bell again. At home, she began making small changes that felt bigger than they looked. She moved the couch away from the window, where they had once watched snowstorms together. She replaced their framed wedding photo on the shelf with a picture of the lake at sunset. She bought new bed sheets, Nothing fancy, just different, a soft blue instead of white. Each change whispered the same quiet message. This is my space now. She rearranged the kitchen cabinets, putting the mugs on a lower shelf, the plates closer to the stove. It wasn't a dramatic makeover, just a subtle reordering. But every new placement was another step toward a life that belonged to her. Her evenings evolved from numbness to routine. At first, she came home and collapsed onto the couch, falling asleep in whatever clothes she'd worn that day. Then slowly, she started cooking small meals for herself. Simple soups, grilled cheese sandwiches, pasta with vegetables. The act of stirring a pot, tasting a sauce, seasoning something just right grounded her in the present moment. She'd eat at the small kitchen table, one plate, one glass, one set of utensils. Sometimes she played instrumental music in the background, filling the silence with something gentle. Other nights, she let the quiet stay, learning that it didn't have to be an enemy. Silence could be heavy, but it could also be honest. On weekends, she began walking more. At first, it was just to get out of the house to avoid being trapped inside memories. She'd walk past the bakery, the library, the old movie theater with its flickering marquee. She passed the church and the town square, where children ran around bundled in coats and hats. Winter air bit at her cheeks, but it also cleared her head in ways sitting still never could. Sometimes she'd stop at the park bench by the frozen pond and just watch the world go by. People laughed, dogs tugged at leashes. Life continued. The thought hurt and healed at the same time. Her faith wavered in those months, not in God's existence, but in His timing. She sat in the church pew on Sunday mornings, the wooden bench familiar beneath her hands. Sometimes all she could pray was, "Help," whispered into her folded fingers. Other times she felt nothing at all, just dryness where once there had been warmth. She sang hymns with a lump in her throat, choking on lines about trust and surrender. But she kept showing up, even when belief felt more like a decision than a feeling. Maybe she thought faith was less about certainty and more about still coming back. Little by little, the town stopped looking at her like a tragedy and started seeing her again as a person. New regulars at the cafe didn't know her story. To them, she was simply Anna who makes great lattes. She found herself laughing at silly jokes customers made, laughing in a way that didn't feel forced. She began to recognize the warmth in her own voice when she asked people how their day was. It surprised her the first time she realized an entire hour had passed without thinking about Cole. The second time, it scared her a little less. Healing apparently didn't arrive all at once. It slipped in quietly between tasks and small moments. There were setbacks too. The day their divorce papers arrived, she sat on the edge of her bed holding the envelope like it was heavier than it really was. Her hands shook as she opened it, eyes scanning black letters that turned a shared life into legal language. Dissolution, property, agreement. Cold words for something that had once been warm and alive. She signed where she was supposed to sign, tears dripping onto the paper and blurring the ink. When she was done, she placed the pen down and just sat there, breathing through the ache. It felt like a funeral no one else attended. That night, she did something she never thought she'd do. She wrote herself a letter. She sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a cheap pen, the overhead light buzzing softly. "Dear Anna," she began, feeling ridiculous and raw at the same time. She wrote about everything she had survived, the impact, the humiliation, the quiet nights. She wrote about how proud she was of the way she'd kept going, even when no one saw the effort it took. She ended the letter with a promise. "One day, you will feel like more than what he left behind." When she finished, she folded the page carefully and tucked it between the pages of her Bible. As seasons changed, so did her rhythms. Spring brought rain and new flowers along the sidewalks, and with them, a subtle shift inside her. She began volunteering at the local community center on her days off, helping with bake sales and small events. It felt good to be part of something again, something that didn't revolve around loss. She taught a group of teenage girls how to bake simple cakes, laughing when flour dusted everyone's noses. They asked her about recipes, not about her past, and she realized how refreshing it was to be known for what she could do, not for what she had lost. Purpose began stitching itself into the torn fabric of her days. One summer evening, as she closed up the cafe, Mrs. Harding locked the door and turned to her. "You're different now," she said, not unkindly. Anna frowned softly, wiping her hands on a towel. "Different how?" "Stronger," her boss replied. "Not harder, just rooted, like a tree that's been through a storm and is still standing." The words sank deep, landing in a place that had once felt like ruins. For the first time, Anna allowed herself to believe that perhaps she wasn't just surviving. Perhaps she was becoming someone new. By the time December rolled around again, a full year since Cole had walked out, the town felt both familiar and changed. Lights went up on Main Street. The church choir rehearsed carols. The square hosted its annual Christmas market. Anna helped decorate the cafe windows with snowflake decals and twinkling lights. There was still a tug in her chest when she smelled pine, still a flicker of sadness when certain songs played. But the grief no longer swallowed her whole. It walked beside her instead, quieter now, less demanding. She stood outside one evening, watching snow fall in slow motion under a street lamp. For the first time in a long time, she whispered, "I'm okay," and almost believed it. She no longer waited for the sound of his truck in the driveway. She no longer checked her phone expecting apologies or explanations that never came. Her life was not the one she had planned, but it was hers, built with her own hands, her own decisions, her own courage. There were still scars, invisible ones that pulsed when the air turned cold, but they no longer defined her. If anyone had told her that the girl on the floor beside the half-decorated tree would one day stand this steady, she wouldn't have believed them. But here she was, working, living, laughing, praying, surviving. She had no idea that far away, the man who had chosen himself was finally beginning to realize what he had lost. The storm everyone had been whispering about finally broke the week before Christmas. What started as rumors and hushed hallway conversations turned into official emails with urgent subject lines. Words like audit, investigation, and liability began to circulate with increasing speed. Cole sat in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows, watching snow fall over the city as lawyers shuffled papers. Spreadsheets he had once been proud of were now being dissected under fluorescent lights. Every bold decision that had earned him praise was suddenly being questioned for its ethics and risk. Success, he realized, looks very different when someone starts asking who paid the real price for it. He had known, deep down, that some lines were being blurred long before anyone said it out loud. Deals rushed through without proper review, shortcuts justified as the cost of staying competitive. He remembered the unease in his stomach, the way he had learned to silence it with ambition. Now those choices stared back at him in black and white on printed reports. At the far end of the table, executives argued about who knew what and when. Cole felt their eyes land on him every time a particular project was mentioned. He was no longer the rising star. They were already calculating how much blame he could hold. In one particularly brutal meeting, a senior executive slid a folder toward him. "Your name is on most of these approvals," the man said, his tone cold and distant. Cole opened the folder, scanning pages filled with signatures that looked too familiar. He remembered thinking he was being brave, daring, visionary when he signed them. Now they looked like confessions written in ink instead of words. "We trusted your judgment," another voice added, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Trust, he realized, was a currency he had spent carelessly, at work and in his personal life. The media caught the scent of blood faster than he imagined. Within days, headlines appeared on financial websites, accusing the company of reckless strategies and moral compromise. Cole's name wasn't always mentioned, but when it was never with admiration. Photos from old company events resurfaced, his confident smile now framed by harsh captions. Investors pulled out, partners backed away, and the board scrambled to protect what was left. Inside the building, people stopped making eye contact with him in the elevator. No one wanted to be standing next to a sinking ship. The day they let him go, the office was dressed for Christmas. Garlands on railings, a massive tree in the lobby. He walked in wearing his best suit, hoping composure could count for something. HR called him in just after lunch, the kind of timing that made it clear this wasn't negotiable. The conversation was clinical, rehearsed, full of phrases like company image, necessary decision, and moving forward. He heard the words terminated effective immediately, and the rest blurred into static. They handed him a cardboard box and gave him 15 minutes to clear his desk. It was a long fall from the 22nd floor to reality. He walked past the cubicles he'd once ruled with confident strides, now carrying his life in a flimsy box. His nameplate, a framed certificate, a few books he'd used to impress others. Suddenly they all felt ridiculous. As he stepped into the elevator, a Christmas song played softly through the speakers, uninvited and cruel. Down in the lobby, employees avoided looking directly at him, their smiles reserved for each other. Someone wished a co-worker Merry Christmas, and the words scraped against his ears. He pushed through the revolving door and stepped out into the cold. Snowflakes landed on his box, sinking into the cardboard like quiet accusations. The apartment felt even larger that night, every polished surface reflecting a version of himself he didn't want to see. He dropped the box on the kitchen counter and sank into a chair, head in his hands. The silence closed in. No hum of dishwasher, no music, no voice asking how his day had been. He reached for his phone out of habit, then stopped, realizing there was no one he could call. Colleagues were suddenly distant, and the women who had once loved his status had slowly disappeared. His parents didn't know the full story yet, and he couldn't bear to hear the disappointment in their voices. He was alone with the truth he had been outrunning for years. He checked his bank account and felt his stomach drop. Legal fees, lost bonuses, and sudden unemployment had sliced through his savings like a knife. The expensive rent he'd once paid without thinking now looked impossible to sustain. He scrolled through transactions, seeing every careless decision in glowing digital lines. Designer suits, overpriced dinners, impulsive trips. He had built an image, not a foundation. He thought of the way Anna used to carefully budget, stretching every dollar with quiet wisdom. He had called it too cautious back then. Now it looked a lot like survival. Days blurred into each other, each one heavier than the last. He woke up late, stared at the ceiling, and avoided opening his email. Messages from the company's legal department stacked up in his inbox like unwelcome visitors. When he did venture outside, the city's Christmas decorations felt mocking, too bright for his dim mood. One afternoon, crossing a busy street, a wave of dizziness hit him out of nowhere. His chest tightened, breathing turned shallow, and his vision blurred at the edges. He gripped a lamppost and realized with a shock he was having a panic attack. He slid down onto a nearby bench, heart racing, hands shaking. People walked past him, bundled in coats and scarves, arms full of shopping bags. Some laughed, some hurried, some complained about the cold, their lives moving forward. Cole stared at his trembling hands and felt, perhaps for the first time, completely powerless. He whispered, "What am I doing?" into the winter air, the words turning to vapor in front of him. There was no boardroom to impress, no deal to close, no script to follow. Just a man who had lost everything that made him feel like someone. A security guard from a nearby building noticed him and walked over slowly. "You all right, sir?" the man asked, his voice steady and calm. Cole swallowed, nodding too quickly. "Yeah, just a rough day." The guard sat down beside him, not pushing, just sharing the cold metal bench. "You're not the first man to sit here looking like the world fell apart," he said quietly. "Funny thing is, sometimes it takes losing everything to figure out what actually matters." Cole stared at him, the words sinking deeper than the man probably intended. That night, back in his apartment, he opened an email from his landlord. Rent increase, effective next month. In any other year, it would have been an inconvenience. Now it felt like the final shove at the edge of a cliff. He did the math 3 times, hoping numbers would rearrange themselves out of mercy. They didn't. He couldn't stay. He spent the next few days putting his life into boxes, this time without the illusion of freedom. Clothes, books, a few kitchen items. He realized how little actually belonged to him in any real sense. The framed achievements, the company gifts, the sleek gadgets looked cheap in the harsh light of loss. He sold what he could, donated what he didn't need, and watched his apartment empty out. The echo of his footsteps on the bare floor sounded like someone else's life closing. He paused by the window, Looking out at the city that had once represented more, now it felt like a place that had simply watched him unravel. A small cardboard box remained on the counter when everything else was gone. Inside were items he hadn't been able to throw away: an old flannel shirt, a photo of a snow-covered field, a handwritten recipe card. The shirt had been from their first Christmas together, when Anna had insisted he wear something cozy instead of corporate. The photo was of the lake near their small town, frozen over, the sky turning pink at sunset. The recipe card was in her handwriting. Cinnamon rolls, the same ones she'd baked the morning he left. He held the card, thumb brushing over the smudged ink where flour had once dusted her fingers. A sharp ache rose in his chest, so strong it almost took his breath away. That evening, an envelope arrived from his parents. The postmark smudged, the handwriting familiar. Inside was a simple Christmas card with a snowy church on the front. His mother had written, "We're having the Christmas Eve service at 7 like always. We'd love to see you sitting in the back row again." His father had added, "Town's the same. Lights are up. They still talk about your winning goal from that one winter game." No mention of his job, no questions about his success. Just a quiet invitation home. He stared at the card for a long time, tracing the words with his eyes. For the first time in years, the idea of going back didn't feel like defeat. It felt like confession. Still, fear clung to him like a second coat. Going back meant more than just seeing his parents. It meant risking seeing Anna. He imagined her living her life without him, steady, whole, maybe even happier. What right did he have to step back into a town whose rhythm he had abandoned? What right did he have to even say her name out loud again? The shame pressed heavier than any corporate scandal had. Losing his job had humbled him. Losing Anna had hollowed him.
One night, as snow fell thickly outside, he wandered the streets without a destination. His feet carried him past shops closing for the evening, past families hurrying home with wrapped boxes. He turned a corner and found himself standing in front of a small church he had never noticed before. Its doors were open, warm light spilling out onto the snow like an invitation. Inside, a few people sat in scattered pews, candles flickering softly in their hands.
Without quite knowing why, Cole stepped in, removed his gloves, and sat in the very back. For the first time in years, he bowed his head and let the weight of his life land. He didn't have eloquent words, no practiced prayer, no bargaining speech. He just whispered, "I've made a mess of everything," into the quiet, and felt tears slip down his face. Memories of Anna, of the town, of the man he used to be swirled together like snow in a shaken globe. "I don't know how to fix what I broke," he admitted, voice barely audible. All he knew was that the life he had chased had collapsed, leaving him with nothing solid to stand on. As the candles glowed and soft music played, a single thought rose in his heart, clear and inescapable. Before he could move forward, he would have to go back. By the time Cole finally bought the bus ticket back to his hometown, Christmas was only a few days away. The station was crowded with people carrying bags, gifts, and tired children, but he felt strangely separate from all of it. He stood in line clutching a worn backpack instead of the sleek luggage he used to carry. His suit had been replaced by a thick old coat that didn't quite fit, borrowed from a second-hand store. As the clerk handed him the ticket, his fingers trembled just enough for him to notice. The screen above the counter flashed the name of the town he had spent years avoiding. For the first time, going back didn't feel like failure. It felt like facing the verdict of his own choices. The bus ride felt longer than it really was, every mile peeling back layers of years he had tried to bury. Outside the window, fields rolled by under a blanket of snow, interrupted only by clusters of houses and lonely gas stations. Inside, the air smelled of coffee from a thermos and the faint scent of someone's packed sandwiches. Families spoke softly, children dozed against fogged-up glass, and Christmas music leaked from someone's headphones. Cole sat in silence, fingers tracing the edge of the ticket until it crumpled slightly. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw Anna's face the night he left, shocked, steady, breaking all at once. He wondered what her eyes would hold now if she saw him again. Anger, indifference, or something even harder to accept. Nothing at all. He arrived in town just as the sun began to set. painting the sky in soft pink and gold behind the familiar buildings. The small bus station looked almost exactly as he remembered. Same faded benches, same vending machine humming in the corner. He stepped down onto the pavement, the cold air biting at his cheeks, and for a moment he couldn't move. It was as if the ghosts of his younger self were standing there too, layered over the present. The boy who had once dreamed of escaping this place. The man who had returned only in memories. The stranger who now stood with nothing. He pulled his backpack higher on his shoulder and took a deep breath that felt like swallowing stones. Then he walked toward Main Street, boots pressing new prints into snow that had seen him leave years ago. The town had dressed itself for Christmas, just like always. Garlands hung between lampposts, and the storefronts glowed with warm lights and carefully arranged displays. The bakery window showcased pies and gingerbread houses. The florist had wreaths made of pine and red ribbon. Children tugged on gloves in parents' hands, faces red from the cold and laughter. A group of teenagers huddled by the cafe, their breath visible in the evening air as they shared jokes. To any outsider, it looked like a postcard-perfect holiday scene. To Cole, it was a reminder of everything he had traded for the illusion of something greater. He kept his head down as he walked, hoping not to be recognized too quickly. Still, small towns weren't known for letting ghosts slip by unnoticed. An older man at the hardware store glanced up, squinting for a moment before realization widened his eyes. Cole nodded politely, a tight, almost apologetic smile crossing his face. The man gave a slow nod back, the kind that said, "I remember, but I'm not sure what to do with you yet." He passed two women talking near the post office, their voices lowering as he approached, curiosity sharpening their gaze. He heard one whisper his name as he moved on, his cheeks burning hotter than the wind could justify. He reached his parents' house just as the streetlights flickered on, casting pools of golden light onto the snow. The house looked smaller than he remembered, but somehow more solid, more rooted than the life he had built in the city. Twinkling lights framed the windows, and a simple wreath hung on the front door, familiar and unpretentious. For a moment, he stood at the bottom of the steps, heart pounding like he was a boy again, coming home past curfew. Then the door opened before he could knock, and his mother appeared, as if she had been listening for his footsteps. Her eyes filled instantly, hands flying to her mouth as she took in his thinner frame and tired eyes. "Hi, Mom," he managed, voice cracking under the weight of everything those two words carried. She didn't ask questions at first. She just wrapped her arms around him and held on. The scent of her laundry detergent and the faint smell of cinnamon clung to her sweater, grounding him in a way nothing else had. His father appeared a moment later, moving slower but steady, his expression a mix of relief and quiet concern. They brought him inside, took his backpack, and sat him at the kitchen table as if he'd just come back from a long trip. The house was warm and bright, counters cluttered with baking trays and recipe cards, a half-iced cake waiting for attention. For a while, they talked about small things, the bus ride, the weather, the town's new Christmas market. It was as if everyone in the room knew the bigger conversation was coming, but no one wanted to scare it away by rushing. Eventually, his father cleared his throat and folded his hands on the table. "We saw some things on the news," he said carefully, not accusing, just honest. Cole's stomach twisted, and he stared at the wood grain beneath his fingers. "Most of it's true," he admitted quietly. "I made choices I shouldn't have. I ignored warnings I shouldn't have." There was no speech prepared this time, no polished justification to offer. He looked up, eyes glassy. "I lost my job. I lost pretty much everything I built there." His mother reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, the simplest act cutting through his shame like light. "Losing what you built isn't the same as losing who you are," she said softly. "But sometimes it takes something falling apart for you to finally see what you've become." Her words landed somewhere deeper than the fear, deeper than the bruised pride. He swallowed hard. "I don't know who I am anymore," he confessed, the admission tearing something open. His father leaned back, studying him with eyes that had seen him at his best and worst. "Maybe that's not the worst place to start from," his father replied. "Empty can be painful, but empty can also be honest." Cole nodded slowly, feeling the first fragile thread of relief wrap around the raw edges of his heart. Later that night, alone in the small bedroom he'd grown up in, He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faded posters on the wall. The room smelled faintly of dust and laundry soap, familiar yet distant, like a memory he had stepped back into by mistake. He opened the old nightstand drawer and found small pieces of his former life. Ticket stubs, a cracked keychain, a photo of him and Anna at the lake. In the photo, they were both younger, faces sunlit, eyes bright with a future they hadn't yet lived. He traced her smile with his thumb, feeling a sharp ache that had nothing to do with the company scandal. "I thought I was walking towards something better," he whispered to the quiet room. "But I walked away from the best thing I ever had." He slept fitfully, dreams tangled with images of boardrooms collapsing into snow-covered fields. Voices from his old life blended with Anna's voice, calling his name in a tone he couldn't quite place. When he woke before dawn, the sky outside his window was still dark, a faint hint of blue on the horizon. He sat up, rubbing his face, and felt an unfamiliar heaviness in his chest. Not just anxiety or fear, but grief. Grief for the man he had become, for the man he might have been if he hadn't run. He opened the curtains and watched as the town slowly lit up, one window at a time, like small declarations of, "We're still here. It's more than I can say for myself," he thought bitterly, pulling on his clothes for the day. That morning, he insisted on walking into town instead of driving. He wanted to feel every step, to absorb the cold, to let the familiarity press against him without filters. His parents didn't argue. They just reminded him to wear a hat and scarf, their concern tucked into ordinary words. As he walked down the quiet street, his breath visible in the air, he noticed little details he had forgotten. The crooked mailbox at the corner house, the way the old oak tree leaned slightly over the road, the sound of wind chimes on Mrs. Taylor's porch. Nothing about the town had tried to impress him, he realized. It had just always been there, steady and unpretentious while he'd been chasing fireworks. When he turned onto Main Street, the morning crowd was just beginning to gather. Shop owners shoveled snow from sidewalks, brushing it aside with practiced movements. The smell of freshly baked bread drifted from the bakery, mixing with the sharp scent of winter air. He passed the bookstore, the barber shop, the florist, and then his steps slowed of their own accord. Across the street, the cafe came into view, its windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. A chalkboard sign out front read, "Holiday Special, Cinnamon Spice Latte." The letters carefully written in looping script. His heart thudded once, hard, as a familiar silhouette moved behind the counter. He hadn't prepared himself for the actual sight of her. Anna stood in profile, her hair pulled back in a loose, practical style, a simple sweater and apron hugging her frame. She moved with the same quiet efficiency he remembered, hands steady as she placed mugs on the counter. A small laugh escaped her lips at something a customer said, and the sound floated through the glass, muted, but unmistakable. There were faint lines at the corners of her eyes now, but they only made her look more real, more grounded. She looked okay, not untouched by what had happened, but not destroyed either. If anything, she looked stronger, and that more than anything made his throat tighten. He stayed on his side of the street for a long moment, hidden by the flow of people passing between them. He didn't deserve to step inside, not yet, not when all he had to offer were apologies and empty hands. His shame rooted him to the sidewalk, the weight of his choices pressing heavier than the snow beneath his boots. He watched as she handed a cup to an elderly woman, leaning in to say something that made them both smile. She wiped the counter, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and moved on to the next order with practiced grace. Life had gone on without him, he realized. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but steadily. He was the one standing outside, stuck in the moment he had created, and she had survived. A part of him wanted to turn around, walk back to his parents' house, and pretend he had never seen her. It would be easier to tell himself that she was better off without his presence stirring old wounds. But running had already cost him too much. He knew now that you can't make things right from a distance. He took a shaky breath, fingers curling and uncurling inside his gloves. He wasn't ready to speak to her yet, not today, not with his heart still tangled in excuses and half-formed confessions. But he could take one step closer to the life he had abandoned. So he crossed the street and stopped just outside the cafe door, watching her through the glass like a man studying the truth. As he stood there, the bell above the door jingled with each new customer, the sound taunting and inviting all at once. His reflection in the glass overlapped with the scene inside, a ghost hovering at the edges of her world. He pressed his lips together, swallowing down the fear rising like a tide. For the first time, his desire to protect her from more hurt outweighed his need to protect himself from discomfort. He whispered into the cold air, barely audible, "I'm sorry, Anna," though she was too far away to hear. It wasn't enough. Not yet. Not by far. But it was the first honest thing he'd said in a long time. And as he finally turned away, he knew that coming back was only the beginning of what he would have to face. That night, lying awake in his childhood bed, the image of her wouldn't leave his mind. Not the memory of the girl he had left, but the woman he had seen today, steady, composed, quietly radiant in her own life. He realized something that made his chest ache in a new way. He didn't just want her forgiveness so he could feel better about himself. He wanted to become the kind of man who could stand beside her without casting a shadow over everything she had rebuilt. Redemption, he understood now, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning how to live differently because of it. The bell above the cafe door chimed with its usual soft jingle, but to Anna it sounded sharper that morning. She had been moving through the rush with practiced ease, frothing milk, calling out orders, wiping the counter between customers. The air smelled of coffee, caramel, and the faint spice of cinnamon. Her familiar battlefield turned refuge. When the door opened again, she glanced up automatically, expecting another regular, another stranger, another safe face. Instead, time stuttered. Cole stepped inside, snow dusting his hair, eyes scanning the room like someone searching for air. For a heartbeat, every sound in the cafe blurred into a distant hum. He looked different, but not in the way she had once imagined during her angriest nights. There was no expensive suit, no polished confidence radiating from every line of his body. His coat was worn, his shoulders slightly hunched, his jaw covered in the start of an unshaven shadow. The man who had left chasing a bigger life now stood in front of the pastry case looking smaller than the boy she'd once fallen for. Their eyes met across the room. Her behind the counter, him just inside the door. The distance between them felt longer than the years that had passed. Someone behind him asked, "Are you in line?" And the moment broke like thin ice. Anna did what she had trained herself to do when pain knocked at the door of her day. She straightened her shoulders, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and turned her attention to the next order. "Large black coffee and a blueberry muffin?" she asked the woman in front of her, voice steady. Her hands moved as if on autopilot, but her pulse thudded at her throat like it was trying to escape. She could feel Cole edging closer in the line, the space shrinking one customer at a time. Every few seconds, her gaze betrayed her and flicked back to him. He didn't look away this time. When there was finally no one left between them, he stepped up to the counter like a man approaching a witness stand. "Hi, Anna," he said, her name catching slightly in his throat. Hearing it from his lips again was like opening a box she had sealed and buried long ago. Her fingers tightened around the pen she held, knuckles paling. "Next," she replied automatically, the word more shield than habit. He swallowed, glancing at the menu overhead as if he had come here for something as simple as coffee. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly, the question hanging between them heavier than any order. She could have refused. She could have told him this was her workplace, her safe zone, not the place for ghosts and apologies. But avoiding him now felt too close to the way he had once avoided her questions. Anna took a breath that scraped its way down her chest. "I'm working," she said, eyes flicking to the line forming behind him. His shoulders dropped, disappointment passing over his features like a quick shadow. "I'll wait," he answered, stepping aside toward an empty table by the window. That simple sentence unsettled her more than any excuse he could have offered. Through the rest of the morning rush, she felt his presence like a quiet ache in the corner of the room. He sat with his hands wrapped around a mug that had gone lukewarm, gaze lowered most of the time. Every so often he looked up and watched her move, not with entitlement, but with a kind of reverent regret. Customers came and went, unaware that history was sitting by the window pretending to sip coffee. Her coworkers noticed his staying, but not the entire story. They only shared quick, curious glances. The clock above the counter seemed to drag and race at the same time. By the time the cafe thinned out, Anna's nerves felt raw. When the last customer left and the door clicked shut behind them, the cafe settled into its mid-morning lull. Sunlight filtered through the front windows, catching dust particles drifting like slow snowflakes in the air. Her coworker headed to the stockroom, leaving her alone at the counter with the dishes and her heartbeat. She turned off the music, claiming she needed quiet to do inventory. In reality, she needed to hear her own voice when she finally answered the questions he carried. She wiped her damp hands on a towel, more for courage than dryness. Then she walked over to his table. Up close, the changes in him were even more apparent. The small lines at the corners of his eyes, the hollowness just beneath the cheekbones, the way his shoulders caved slightly inward. His gaze lifted when her shadow fell across the table, and for a moment he looked younger, almost like the man who had once promised her forever. "Thank you for not asking me to leave," he said softly. "I thought about it," she replied, not harshly, just honest. He nodded, accepting the impact without flinching away this time. "Can we sit?" she asked, surprising both of them. She took the chair opposite him, apron still tied at her waist, hands clasped together on the table. The cafe around them suddenly felt too quiet, every creak and clink amplified. He exhaled, the breath shaky, and for a second she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of her anger, but of his own truth. "I don't know where to start," he admitted, fingers twisting the edge of the napkin. "Usually people start with what they came here for," she answered, voice calm but not inviting shortcuts. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "I came to say I'm sorry." The words dropped between them like an object she refused to pick up automatically. "How many years late is that?" she asked quietly. Not cruel, just unwilling to pretend. He flinched but didn't look away. "Too many," he said. "Long enough for me to become someone I don't respect." Her brows drew together at that, a flicker of curiosity slipping through her guard. He took a breath. "I left because I thought this town, this marriage, this life made me small. I blamed everything but my own fear." Anna listened, face unreadable. The familiar cafe sounds a distant background. "I hurt you," he continued, voice cracking. "I broke our vows, not with another person, but with my selfishness. For a long time, I pretended I could outrun what I did to you." She considered his words for a moment before answering. "Do you think saying you're sorry fixes that night?" she asked, eyes steady on his. He shook his head immediately. "No, I know it doesn't." "So why now?" she pressed. "Why after so many Christmases when you could have sent an email, a letter, anything?" Cole ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. "Because until everything collapsed, I was still living like the man who left you. I thought success meant I'd been right to walk away." His voice dropped. "Losing it all showed me I'd been wrong about everything that actually mattered." He spoke of the company, of the decisions he'd signed off on, of headlines and a cardboard box carrying his career. But he didn't linger there, didn't use it as a plea for sympathy. "That mess is mine," he said, gaze drifting to the window for a moment. "I'll deal with it." He turned back to her. But the emptiest part of losing everything was realizing I had destroyed the one place that ever felt like home before any of that. His eyes shone, not with rehearsed tears but with something raw and unguarded. "I can't change the fact that I chose myself over us. I just couldn't keep living without at least telling you that I finally see what I did." Anna's throat tightened, but she refused to let her emotions answer for her. "You seeing it now doesn't erase the nights I cried myself to sleep," she said softly. "It doesn't give me back the Christmases I spent pretending I was fine so people wouldn't pity me." Her voice didn't rise. The steadiness hurt more than any shouted accusation could have. "I learned how to work 2 jobs, how to fix the leaking sink, how to sleep without waiting for the door to open." She looked at him, eyes glistening but clear. "Your regret doesn't erase what I lived." The sentence hit him like impact, but he didn't try to defend himself. A tear slipped down his cheek and he wiped it away with the heel of his hand, embarrassed but not hiding. "I know," he whispered. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve a conversation, honestly." He glanced around the cafe at the mugs, at the chalkboard menu, at the life she had built in the wreckage. "I'm not here to ask for us back," he added quickly, as if the thought of demanding that horrified him too. "I just needed you to hear from my own mouth that I was wrong. Not busy, not confused, wrong. And that I am sorry, not because my life fell apart, but because yours had to, alone." Silence stretched between them, not empty, but full of everything that had never been said. Anna looked at his hands, hands that had once held her steady during storms, hands that had signed papers that sent him away. They shook slightly now, fingers interlaced like someone clinging to the edge of something crumbling. "I used to imagine this moment," she admitted quietly. "You coming back, saying all the right words, realizing what you lost." She let out a breath that trembled at the edges. In those fantasies, it made everything better. Her gaze met his, steady and sad. "But real life doesn't work like that, Cole." Her honesty sliced through whatever faint hope he had kept hidden. "What does real life look like for you now?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She glanced around the cafe, the counter, the regulars table, the little display of homemade cookies by the register. "It looks like showing up here every day," she said. "Paying my bills, laughing with customers, crying sometimes when no one's around. It looks like friends who know me as I am now, not as some man's wife. It looks like going to bed tired but at peace with the fact that I didn't abandon myself. And it looks like not handing my heart back to the first person who suddenly remembers it existed." He nodded slowly, her words landing like stones building a wall he understood he had no right to knock down. "I won't ask you for anything," he said. "Not trust, not a second chance, not even friendship." He swallowed, the movement visible in his throat. "You owe me nothing, Anna. Not even this conversation." A single tear slid down her face then, surprising her more than him. She wiped it away quickly, frustrated with her own softness. "You're right," she replied quietly. "I don't owe you anything, but I also won't pretend I'm made of stone. Your apology doesn't change the past, but I hear it." She stood up first, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor. "I need to get back to work," she said, the sentence both an exit and a boundary. He rose as well but didn't move closer, didn't reach for her, didn't try to turn the moment into a movie scene. "Thank you for listening," he murmured, sincerity heavy in every word. She gave a small nod, eyes tired but resolute. "What you do next will say more than anything you just did," she said. Then she turned back toward the counter, tying her apron tighter as if anchoring herself to the life she had fought to build. Behind her, Cole stood for a moment longer, understanding with painful clarity that the apology he had finally spoken had changed nothing on the surface. Yet somehow, it had shifted everything inside them both. In the days after the conversation at the cafe, Cole did something he had never done before in his life. He stopped trying to fix everything with words. There were no late-night texts, no flowers arriving at her door, no dramatic gestures designed to tug at old memories. He didn't wait outside the cafe hoping to accidentally bump into her again. He gave her the distance she had asked for, even though every part of him ached to close it. If he had ever loved her only in speeches before, now he wanted to learn if he could love her in silence. For once, what he did mattered more than what he could say. He started small, because small was all he had. The first call he made was to the only place that had ever seen him as more than his resume, the local church. The pastor remembered him from his teenage years, from loud youth nights and one clumsy guitar solo at a Christmas service. Now Cole sat in the small office, hands clasped, explaining that he needed work. Any kind, no matter how simple. The pastor studied him for a long time, noticing the exhaustion behind the humility. "There's a lot around here that needs doing," he finally said. "None of it pays much. All of it matters." Cole began coming in early, when the sanctuary still smelled of wood polish and yesterday's candles. He swept floors, straightened hymnals, shoveled snow from the front steps before the elderly members arrived. He scrubbed coffee stains from the fellowship hall tables, fixed a wobbly pew, replaced burnt-out bulbs one by one. No one took photos of him working. There was no audience, no applause. Sometimes people walked past without even noticing him, hurrying to find their seats. Other times they offered a cautious nod, as if acknowledging both his past and his effort. He accepted both reactions without complaint. The pastor eventually handed him a set of old keys and a list of families who might need help. "Don't make a speech," he advised gently. "Just show up and ask what you can do." So Cole knocked on doors he had once driven past without seeing. He carried firewood into living rooms where grandfathers coughed quietly in armchairs. He repaired a broken step on Mrs. Taylor's porch, her hands shaking when she tried to offer him cookies afterward. He fixed a leaky faucet for a single mother down the street, refusing the crumpled bills she tried to pay him with. "It's just work," he said. But inside, it felt like confession. Word spread through the town the way news always did, uneven and half-true. Some people said he was trying to repair his image after the company scandal. Others insisted he was only staying until something better came along. At the cafe, whispers floated between tables like steam. But those were stories from a distance. The ones who had seen him on his knees fixing pipes or standing outside in the cold holding ladders told a quieter version. "He doesn't talk much," they said. "He just shows up." Anna tried not to listen, but in a town that small, you hear things whether you want to or not. A customer mentioned how Cole had spent an entire afternoon clearing snow from the church parking lot. Another spoke of him hauling boxes at the food drive without taking a break, sweat visible even in the cold. Someone else casually said, "That boy looks different." While stirring sugar into their coffee, Anna slid plates across the counter, her face neutral, her heart anything but. She didn't ask for more details. She also didn't ask anyone to stop talking. The first time she saw him again after the apology was on a Tuesday evening. She was closing up the cafe, wiping down tables and stacking chairs, when she noticed movement outside. Across the street, under the lamppost by the church steps, a ladder wobbled slightly as Cole reached up to adjust a string of lights. Wind pushed against him, making the bulbs sway like tiny stars. He held the ladder with one hand, stretching farther than was sensible, his breath visible in the cold. Nobody stood below to steady it. No one watched to admire the finished work. Anna paused with the rag in her hand, chest tightening at the sight of him doing something no one had asked her to witness. He climbed down a moment later, stepping back to inspect the row of lights. A few sections flickered, then steadied, bathing the church entrance in warm gold. He smiled to himself, not broadly, just a small private expression of satisfaction. Snow began to fall again, flakes catching in his hair on the shoulders of his worn coat. He brushed off his hands, picked up the ladder, and carried it around the side of the building. Anna let the curtain fall back into place before he could turn and see her watching. Her heart argued with itself long after she turned the cafe lights off. Inside, conflict spread like cracks through glass. Part of her clung fiercely to the years she had survived without him, to the boundaries she had fought to build. She remembered the weight of the divorce papers, the nights she had held herself together with nothing but stubbornness and whispered prayers. Another part of her, quieter but insistent, noticed the difference between the man on that ladder and the one who had walked out her door. That part didn't ask for explanations. It simply observed how he carried himself, not with entitlement but with a fatigue that looked a lot like surrender. She didn't know which part of her would win. As the days inched closer to Christmas, their paths crossed more frequently, though rarely in words. He held the door open for her once at the grocery store, stepping back as if afraid to accidentally brush against her. "Thank you," she said politely, eyes not fully meeting his. "Of course," he replied, voice soft, stepping aside immediately after. At the town square, she saw him helping set up booths for the holiday market, carrying heavy crates of decorations. He laughed once at something a child said, the sound brief and surprised, like someone remembering he still could. Each sighting left her with more questions than answers. What struck her most wasn't what he did, it was what he didn't do. He didn't corner her in aisles or insist on just one more conversation. He didn't send gifts to her home, trying to buy back something that had never been for sale. He didn't tell anyone they were working things out, just because she had listened to his apology. When people gossiped, he neither defended himself with excuses nor used vulnerability as a performance. He simply carried on, day after day, showing up where help was needed. He seemed less interested in proving he had changed and more interested in actually changing. On the Sunday before Christmas, she saw him slip into the back pew at church. He arrived early enough to avoid the bustle of people finding their seats, head bowed, hands clasped. She sat near the middle, surrounded by families and familiar faces, the murmur of voices rising and falling like a gentle tide. When the congregation stood to sing, she heard his voice faintly behind her. Not strong, not showy, just honest. It cracked on certain lines, especially on the verse about chains being broken and hearts made whole. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to see his face to know those words cut close. Instead, she stared at the stained glass window and let the ache settle quietly under her ribs. After the service, people spilled out into the cold, their breath forming clouds as they chatted in small circles. Anna stepped down the stone steps slowly, clutching her coat tighter around her. Ahead, she saw Cole carrying a box of leftover bulletins toward the side entrance, trying to avoid the center of the crowd. A group near the door spoke louder than they probably realized, words carried easily by the winter air. "Some men only come running back when life falls apart," one woman said, her tone sharp. "Maybe he just didn't like being important somewhere else anymore," another added. Anna watched as the words reached him. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn, didn't correct them, didn't defend himself. Instead, he simply kept walking, box pressed against his chest like something fragile. There was no flash of anger, no sarcastic remark, no attempt to clean the record in public. He disappeared around the corner of the building, taking their opinions with him like another weight added to the load. Anna felt an unexpected surge of something that surprised even her. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it wasn't satisfaction either. It was a quiet sorrow for the fact that he had finally found humility at a cost she still wasn't sure she could accept. That afternoon, the pipes in the cafe chose the worst possible moment to rebel. A sudden metallic groan echoed from the back, followed by an ominous drip that turned quickly into a thin stream. Water began pooling beneath the sink in the storage room, soaking boxes and creeping across the floor. Anna and her coworker scrambled with towels and buckets, frustration rising with the spreading puddle. The plumber said he could only come the next day. "We can't close on the busiest week before Christmas," her boss said over the phone, worry sharp in her voice. They needed help now, and Anna knew it. Calling Cole wasn't in any script she had written for her future. But when the pastor, who had stopped by for coffee, heard about the leak, his expression shifted. "Cole's been helping with repairs at the church," he mentioned carefully. "He's gotten pretty good at emergency fixes." The suggestion hung in the air like a dare. Anna hesitated, towel in hand, staring at the spreading water. Pride and practicality wrestled in her chest, each one fierce and stubborn. Finally, she exhaled, feeling the decision scrape against old wounds. "If you see him," she said quietly, "tell him we could use a hand, just with the pipes." He arrived less than half an hour later, toolbox in hand, coat unzipped, breath visible in sharp puffs. He didn't ask why she hadn't called him directly. He didn't seem to assume anything beyond the task at hand. "Where is it?" he asked, voice steady, almost all business. She led him to the back room, boots splashing lightly through the shallow water. He knelt without complaint, jeans soaking at the knees, hands moving with focused determination. Anna watched from the doorway, arms folded, heart pounding in ways that had nothing to do with plumbing. There was something deeply humbling about the man who had once walked out with a suitcase now on his knees, fixing her flooded floor. He worked quietly, tightening valves, replacing a worn-out piece, wiping his hands on an old rag. When he finished, the steady drip slowed, then stopped altogether, leaving only the mess to mop up. "You'll still need a plumber to check it properly," he said, standing and pushing damp hair back from his forehead. "But this should hold you over for now." "Thank you," she replied, the words carrying more weight than they usually did. He nodded, picking up his toolbox without reaching for anything else. As he walked out into the cold again, leaving wet footprints on the tiled floor, Anna realized that his apology hadn't changed her decision about the past, but his choices, one small act at a time, were quietly rewriting the way her heart saw him in the present. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in cold air and golden light. The town square buzzed with quiet excitement. Children running between booths, adults cupping hot chocolate in gloved hands. Strings of warm lights crisscrossed overhead, turning the falling snow into drifting sparks. A small stage had been set up by the nativity scene where the choir would sing later. The scent of pine, baked goods, and roasted chestnuts blended into something both festive and familiar. Anna stood near the cafe's outdoor table, arranging trays of cookies and thermoses of coffee. Her heart felt oddly calm for a night that held so many ghosts. She had slept little the night before, not from dread, but from a strange anticipation she didn't fully understand. Her conversation with Cole replayed in fragments, his apology, his restraint, the way he had worked on her floor without asking for anything in return. She'd watched him over weeks, not as the man she once loved, but as the man he was trying to become. Every small act had settled in her mind like snowflakes on a windowsill, quiet, yet undeniable. She still carried scars, still remembered the ache of waking up alone those first winters. But the girl he had left behind wasn't the same woman standing here now. She knew her worth, even as she considered letting someone close again. Across the square, Cole helped the pastor carry a wooden bench closer to the stage. His breath rose in small clouds, cheeks flushed from the cold and the effort. He wore the same worn coat, gloves with frayed edges, a knit hat pulled low over his ears. To anyone passing, he looked like any other volunteer. No spotlights, no grand introduction. But Anna's gaze found him easily, the way it always had, even when she didn't want it to. He moved carefully, attentive to the older man's pace, pausing whenever the pastor needed to catch his breath. Something in that simple patience tugged at a place inside her she had kept tightly sealed. Their eyes met when he straightened up, hands resting on his hips as he surveyed the square. The contact was brief but unavoidably real. A silent acknowledgement cutting through the winter air. He didn't look away this time out of shame, and he didn't approach as if entitled to conversation. Instead, he gave a small, genuine smile, soft, almost uncertain, before turning back to help hang a final strand of lights. The gesture wasn't a demand. It was an offering. Anna looked down at the tray in front of her, adjusting a row of cookies that were already perfectly aligned. Her heart beat a little faster. Not from panic, but from the weight of a choice approaching. The service began as the sky deepened into a rich navy, stars peeking through above the church steeple. People gathered with candles in hand, the square glowing like a sea of softened light. Children tugged at coats, whispering questions about the story they already knew by heart. The choir took their places on the small stage, voices warming up in soft climbing notes. Anna stood near the edge of the crowd, close enough to see everything, far enough to slip away if she needed to. She wrapped her fingers around her own candle, unlit, feeling the smooth wax under her gloves. This night used to hurt. Tonight, it felt like a door half open. When the pastor stepped forward to speak, the crowd quieted, snow still falling in gentle, steady flakes. He talked about the first Christmas, about unexpected arrivals and hearts unprepared for what was coming. He spoke of second chances, not as something cheap or easy, but as something that always cost someone something. Sometimes, he said, scanning the faces before him, grace looks like a door you thought was permanently shut, cracking open just enough for light to slip through. Anna's chest tightened, a familiar ache returning in a new shape. She didn't look behind her, but she knew Cole was somewhere in the crowd, listening too. The words hovered over them both like fragile snowflakes ready to melt or settle. The first hymn rose from the crowd, voices blending into a tapestry of imperfect harmony. Silent night, holy night. They sang, some confidently, others off-key, all sincere. Anna's voice joined them quietly, the lyrics carrying years of memories, some warm, some sharp. She remembered past Christmas Eves when Cole had stood at her side, their shoulders touching in the cold. She remembered the empty space he'd left, how she'd stared at candles through a blur of tears. Tonight she sang not as half of a broken promise, but as a whole woman with a choice. The difference felt like both loss and freedom. As the song ended, the pastor invited those who wanted prayer to come closer to the front. A few people stepped forward, an older woman leaning on a cane, a couple clutching each other's hands, a teenager with eyes full of questions. Anna stayed where she was, not because she didn't need anything, but because she had already spent so many nights pouring out her heart in private. Instead, she bowed her head where she stood, whispering the simplest prayer she knew. God, if there's anything you want me to see tonight, help me see it. And if there's anything you want me to release, help me let it go. The words felt less like a demand and more like surrender. For the first time, she wasn't telling heaven what she wanted. She was letting heaven answer. When she opened her eyes, the crowd had shifted slightly, people moving to make space, candles flickering in the light breeze. Her gaze drifted to the side of the square almost against her will. There, near the nativity scene, a simple wooden manger, a few bales of hay dusted with snow, stood Cole. He was alone, just outside the thicker cluster of people, candle unlit in his hand. His head was bowed, shoulders drawn in as if he were trying to make himself smaller. Something in his posture spoke of a man stripped of performances, left only with what was honest. Without fully deciding to, Anna began to walk toward him. Each step felt loud in her own ears, crunching softly in the snow. She passed familiar faces that blurred into a background of wool hats, scarves, and candlelight. Her heart pounded, not because she felt pulled backward into the past, but because she sensed she was walking toward a version of herself that was new. When she stopped a few feet from him, he didn't seem to notice at first. His lips moved slightly, as if he were speaking words only he and God could hear. She cleared her throat softly. "You didn't light your candle," she said. His head snapped up, eyes widening when he realized who stood in front of him. For a second, neither of them spoke, the world narrowing to the space between their breath. "I didn't know if I should," he admitted, glancing down at the unlit wick. It felt like a picture I hadn't earned the right to hold. Snow clung to his eyelashes, catching the nearby light and making his eyes look more vulnerable than she'd ever seen them. Anna stepped closer, her own candle flame steady in the cold air. She touched its small fire to his, watching as the wick caught and flared to life. "You don't earn light," she said quietly. "You either accept it or you don't." The tiny flame reflected in both their eyes, a fragile, flickering thing standing in for all the words they didn't know how to say. He swallowed hard, voice rough. "Anna, I meant everything I said at the cafe. I know I don't deserve." She lifted a hand, stopping him gently. "I don't want to hear the word deserve from you again," she replied, not unkindly. His mouth closed, confusion and hurt flickering across his features. "Because if this is about what you deserve," she continued, "you'll spend the rest of your life arguing with ghosts." She took a breath, feeling the weight of every Christmas between then and now. "And if it's about what I deserve, I'll spend the rest of mine keeping walls up so high that even Grace can't climb them." He stared at her, chest rising and falling as if each breath hurt. "So what is it about then?" he asked, the question not rhetorical but desperate for direction. She looked down at the flame between them, then back at his face, older, worn, yet somehow more open. "It's about what we choose next," she said softly. "I can't rewrite the night you left. You can't unbreak what broke. Those chapters are already printed." Her voice trembled slightly, but her gaze didn't. "But the story isn't over unless we decide it is, and I'm tired of letting pain have the final word." His eyes brimmed with tears. He didn't blink away this time. "Anna, I'm not asking you to forget," he said. "I don't even know if I have the right to ask you to forgive." He drew in a shaky breath, candle trembling between his fingers. "All I know is I want to stay, in this town, close enough to help, even if you never let me back into your heart." He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision that straightened his spine and loosened his grip on fear. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered himself to his knees in the snow beside the manger scene. Not as a show, but as a man who had finally run out of any other posture that made sense. Gasps rippled quietly through those close enough to see, but no one moved to interrupt. Cole set the candle carefully in the snow, its flame unwavering despite the cold. He looked up at her from the ground, eyes level with the wooden baby in the manger a few feet away. "I'm not kneeling to beg you to take me back," he said, voice steadying with each word. "I'm kneeling because this is where I should have been a long time ago, before God, before you, before the truth of who I've been." His breath fogged in front of him, But he didn't look away. "If you never call me yours again, I'll still stay right here, learning how to be a man who doesn't run." Anna's throat tightened, emotion rising like a tide she could no longer push back. For years she had imagined him on his knees only in dreams, soaked with anger or longing. In those fantasies, it had always been about her victory, her vindication. But the man kneeling before her now didn't look like someone defeated. He looked like someone surrendered. There was no manipulation in his eyes, no script, no carefully placed lines. Just a man stripped of everything except honesty and a willingness to remain. The difference pierced through layers even grief hadn't fully reached. She stepped closer, boots crunching softly in the snow until she stood right in front of him. For a moment she simply looked at him, letting her heart catch up with her mind. Then she set her own candle down beside his, the two flames leaning toward each other in the slight breeze. "I don't know yet what I can give you," she admitted, voice thick with feeling. "I don't know if I'm ready to call this a second chance or just a new kind of beginning." He nodded, accepting the uncertainty without trying to rush it. "But I know this," she added, tears finally spilling over. "I don't want to spend another Christmas pretending I don't care whether you're lost or found." She extended her hand toward him, palm open, fingers gently trembling in the cold. He stared at it as if it were the most undeserved, miraculous thing he'd ever seen. Then, slowly, he placed his hand in hers, the contact sending a quiet jolt through them both. She didn't pull him all the way up. Instead, she steadied him as he rose, the movement symbolic but unforced. They stood side by side, two candles burning at their feet, not as the couple they once were, but as two people choosing not to walk away again. Above them, the choir began another carol, voices rising into the night like a promise. Anna squeezed his hand once, not as a guarantee, but as an answer. The past was still real, the pain still remembered, yet somewhere between snow and starlight, a different kind of hope had quietly begun. The square slowly emptied, leaving only echoes of laughter and the soft crunch of boots fading into side streets. Candles went out one by one, little curls of smoke rising toward the dark winter sky. Anna and Cole remained near the nativity scene, their hands still loosely intertwined as if neither quite knew how to let go. The choir's last note lingered in the air before dissolving into silence. Snow kept falling, gentler now, wrapping the town in a quiet that felt less like loneliness and more like a held breath. For the first time in years, Christmas Eve didn't feel like a wound reopening for Anna. It felt like a page turning. They walked slowly toward the cafe, not in the rushed step of people escaping the cold, but in the careful pace of two hearts recalibrating. Windows glowed softly on either side of the street, families gathered around tables, silhouettes moving behind curtains. The bell above the cafe door chimed when she unlocked it, the familiar sound strangely intimate in the empty room. She turned on only a few lights, letting the glow from outside spill in, painting the counters in soft gold. Cole stood near the entrance, hands shoved awkwardly in his pockets as if afraid to disturb the life she had built here. "This place suits you," he said quietly. "Feels like you." She smiled, a real one this time, small but steady. "It took me a while to feel that too." She busied herself at the counter more for courage than necessity. 2 mugs, 1 kettle, muscle memory moving faster than her thoughts. When she set the first mug in front of him, hot chocolate with a sprinkle of cinnamon the way he used to like it, he froze for a second. "You still remember," he murmured, fingers wrapping around the warmth as if it could anchor him. "Some things I chose to forget," she replied softly. "Others, I chose to remember differently." He lifted the mug to his lips and closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if the taste carried both comfort and consequence. "This is the first thing that's felt like home in a long time," he admitted. They sat at a small table near the window, the town's Christmas lights reflecting on the glass beside them. For a while, they didn't talk about the past or the future, just the present. This small shared space between what had been and what might be. He told her about the families he'd been helping, not as proof, but as part of his days now. She shared small stories from the cafe, the regulars, the teenagers she'd taught to bake, the quiet pride of paying every bill on her own. There was no rush to define anything, no labels tossed around like bandages. Just two people learning how to be in the same room again without pretending nothing had happened. The honesty between them felt fragile, but it was real. At one point, a gust of wind rattled the door, making the wreath outside tremble. Anna glanced over, then back at him, her expression softening. "You know this doesn't mean everything is suddenly okay, right?" He nodded immediately, eyes serious. "I know. I don't expect you to magically trust me because I finally decided to grow up." He set his mug down, hands open on the table. "If all I ever get is the chance to stay here and keep becoming a better man, that's still more than I deserve." She studied him in the low light, searching for the old reflexes: pride, defensiveness, polished charm. They weren't there. In their place was something quieter, humbler, and somehow braver. She took a breath that tasted of cocoa and nerves. "I don't want a man who begs for me," she said, voice steady. "I want a man who stays, who tells the truth even when it doesn't make him look good, who doesn't run when he's scared." He swallowed, emotion tightening his features. "That's the man I'm trying to become," he replied. "Not just for you. For God, for myself, for the people I hurt along the way." Her eyes glistened, but her smile didn't fade. "Good. Because I'm not going back to being the woman who waits at the window wondering if she's enough." "You weren't not enough, Anna," he whispered, voice breaking. "I was too cowardly to be honest." "I know," she answered gently. "That's why we're standing here, either at the start of redemption or at the cleanest goodbye we'll ever get." Silence settled again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Outside, snow swirled past the window like a soft curtain, wrapping the world beyond in white. Inside, the cafe felt like a tiny sanctuary carved out of time, just for this moment. Anna stood up, heart pounding, and walked to the door to flip the sign to closed. She turned back to him, the dim lights catching on the tears she no longer tried to hide. "Come here," she said softly. Not an order, not a plea, an invitation. His chair scraped back quietly as he rose, every step toward her feeling like both confession and vow. They met in the middle of the room, between tables she had wiped down alone for years and a counter he had finally knelt beside to repair. Up close, she could see the way his eyes held both regret and something new, a tenderness that had nothing to do with guilt. Her hand lifted almost instinctively, fingers brushing a snow-damp strand of hair from his forehead. He closed his eyes at the touch, breath catching, as if afraid that any sudden movement might break whatever fragile miracle had brought them here. "Anna," he whispered, her name more prayer than word. She pressed her palm lightly against his chest, feeling the rapid drum of his heart beneath worn fabric. "Don't promise me forever," she murmured. "Just promise me you'll be present." His hand rose slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers settled gently along her jaw, thumb sweeping away a tear that had escaped. "I promise to stay," he said, each syllable careful, reverent. "To show up, to tell the truth, even when it costs me." Her eyes searched his, not for perfection, but for resolve. And what she saw there made something inside her finally, quietly, unclench. So, in a small cafe in a small town on a Christmas Eve that could have been just another scar, Anna chose not to rewrite the past but to write a different future. She leaned in first. The kiss wasn't rushed or desperate. It wasn't about erasing what hurt. It was slow, trembling, full of all the words they weren't ready to say out loud yet. His hand moved to the back of her neck, gentle, steady, as if he understood this was holy ground. She held onto his coat, feeling the rough fabric beneath her fingers and the equally rough journey that had brought them here. Years of silence, anger, survival, and change folded themselves into that moment, not disappearing, but finally finding somewhere to rest. When they parted, their foreheads remained touching, breaths mingling in the warm air. Outside, the church bells began to ring midnight. Anna smiled through tears, eyes shining. "This doesn't fix everything," she said in a whisper. "No," he agreed, a soft smile mirroring hers. "But maybe it means we're done letting what broke us be the only chapter that counts." She nodded, feeling a deep, surprising peace settle in the spaces grief had once ruled. Then let's walk this slowly, she said. Day by day, Christmas by Christmas. No more vanishing, no more pretending. His answer was simple. I'm not going anywhere. For the first time, she believed him, not because of the promise, but because of the path he'd already started to walk. And in that little cafe, with snow falling outside and lights glowing softly above them, redemption didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with presence. If this story touched something inside you, you're not alone. Maybe you've been Anna, the one left to rebuild in silence. Maybe you've been Cole, the one who only understood what they had after everything fell apart. Or maybe you're somewhere in between, still trying to believe that real change and real forgiveness are possible. Tell us in the comments, did you see yourself more in Anna or in Cole? What part of this story hit you the hardest? Would you give a second chance? If you saw real change? If this Christmas redemption story spoke to your heart, please like this video. Subscribe to Redeemed Hearts for more long, emotional stories of second chances and real love, and share this video with someone who knows what it feels like to be broken and still believes in redemption. Because here on Redeemed Hearts, Christmas Redemption, we believe that God doesn't erase the past. He redeems hearts willing to stay, to heal, and to love differently. See you in the next story.